All right, and now let's work our way down from the nose and talk about the lips. Okay, so where does it all begin, right? It all begins right in the when you're a tiny little baby, right? This is where our lips kind of come together and fuse, and everybody's probably heard of cleft palates and things like that, and that's kind of improper fusing kind of in kind of the development stage. Okay, so if we go way back to when you're just a tiny embryo, this is what you look like, which is, to be honest, not recognizable for one, but also a little bit scary. But to help kind of orient you, like this is going to be the opening of the mouth, right? These are going to be the nostrils. The eyes are going to rotate in from back here, right? And let me just show you how this all evolves in a little drawing. This is, essentially the face comes together like this. This is your nose wedging down. This is your upper lip coming in from each side. And this is your lower lip kind of fused earlier, right? This is the lower lip kind of fused at one point in the middle. So this is the mandibular kind of branch, the maxillary branch, and this is kind of the nasal branch coming down. They fuse together, and it should be no surprise that, or maybe it is a surprise, but the philtrum that we get in our nose and some of the kind of just the separation of these parts of the lips all relate back to how we develop kind of in the womb, right? And this is not the most amazing high-resolution animation that you'll ever see, but it's worth showing. This is kind of old school, so bear with me. Okay, there it goes all the way. So you can see, at least in the final state, how all that is transitioned, right? You get the wedge down the middle, which is, in fact, the philtrum, right? And you get, and gives rise to the cupid's bow, and then you have the rest of the upper lip, which actually merges in from a different angle. Okay, watch again now that you know what the colors are. Nostrils rotating in, eyes coming in from the side, and the maxilla expanding from the yellow. Okay, and then you're a tiny baby, right? And you can almost see and appreciate how all this is fused together. I mean, if you look closely, you can kind of see the remnants of that still kind of on the surface, and we kind of continue to bear those forms for the rest of our lives, right? You have kind of the cupid's bow up here, and that's very distinctly the different parts, right? So this is the transition. And then on the bottom, remember, it only merged in one part, right? It didn't have this triple wedge coming together. And so what you're left with is these two lobes on the lower lip as opposed to three on the upper lip, right? And that's something that I think everybody is kind of familiar with who's ever read an art book about drawing lips. But to know kind of the origin of it is kind of interesting and kind of important. Now, to talk about lips properly, we have to get into the musculature of the mouth. And I'm going to reserve the expression of these muscles for next week. But we need to talk about orbicularis oris. And that's oris, O-R-I-S, and orbicular in the same way orbicular was spelled before for orbicularis oculi. Let me make that maybe a better color. Okay, I'll do an abbreviation, save you me spelling it out. Okay, so orbicularis oris is super, super complicated. Orbicularis oculi was trivial. Orbicularis oculi was only muscle fibers spanning around like this. That's all. Bicularis oris is just this conflation in this mix and mash of muscle fibers coming from every which way, right? It's not just its own concentric muscle fibers, but it actually is infused with muscle fibers from all these different angular pullers and lip pullers. And so it's hard to really categorize it as just one single muscle because it does so many things and is manipulated in so many ways. But if I just flip to this next slide to give you an idea how crazy this is. So over in our cheek, I've mentioned this before, just along the teeth there is a muscle called buccinator, right? And in the buccal, just underneath the buccal fat, right? Essentially his job is to pull the teeth to the side, or pull the opening of the mouth to the side. He helps to grind food in your cheek along the teeth so you can chew it. If you ever see a cow chewing, or eat cow cheek, it's buccinator that you're actually eating. And a big, tough, often used muscle. But what it does is it sends fibers and they crisscross at the corner of the mouth, and we'll talk about this in a minute. They crisscross here and it shoots up and crisscross over to the other side. And same with the upper ones go to the bottom ones go to the top, and then some of them in fact just go straight through. All right, so the more superior and inferior ones don't crisscross, but they just shoot straight through. Okay, these are at the deepest. These are at the deepest layers, and then you have other muscles. Kind of your big frowning muscle is something called. This is an old slide. This is an old Gray's Anatomy slide. He calls it triangularis, which is the old name for depressor anguli oris, so the depressor of the corner of the mouth. And we'll talk more about those names next week, so don't worry about it just now. I'm trying to explain the concept of the craziness going on to Bicularis oris, right? So the depressor of the corner of the mouth fires fibers up and around, right? And you know, some of them stop here at the corner, some intermingle and pass up. Likewise, the opposite of triangularis is something called caninus, and instead of a depressor, he's an elevator, and he elevates the corner. You might imagine there's a lot of symmetry evolving. Things that depress also need things that lift, right? So there's that kind of holds true for a lot of the other muscles we'll look at as well. Okay, and then you have a couple bits of the muscle that anchor to actually the inner edge of the nostril and the bottom edge of the columella, and some of them grab onto the philtrum, in fact, some of the fibers, right? So they kind of anchor onto the philtrum. And then down here, they anchor just below, just superior to kind of the boss of the chin, right? The big ball of the chin. Right, so what you get is you get a super malleable structure that's able to pull from side to side and push and retract and stretch. So hence our ability to vocalize and express and make crazy shapes with our mouth, and we'll see crazy shapes next week. Okay, but now what happens if we take a cross-section through the lip, and what actually is it made of? Okay, so this is actually cross-section through the lower lip, not the upper lip. Help orient you, here is a tooth, and also a little bit of stubble out here to orient you as well. So as we kind of work our way up from the stubble, we kind of hit this transition point on the lip, and this is where vermilion border is the name of it, and it should actually be down here. That's the transition between normal skin and this kind of more vascularized red of the lips, right? So this is the vermilion border. And then as you go up and into the mouth, you're kind of getting to something called the mucosa, which is a slightly different kind of skin, right? All the stuff on the outside is keratinized, or it has keratin in it, which is a kind of a fibrous protein. Essentially, that's what flakes and wrinkles and gives you kind of that relatively rough appearance of the surface of the skin in kind of close-up. When you get to the inside of the lip, it's nice and smooth, right? And it's wet as well. This vermilion is also keratinized, so this is where you get all those wrinkles in your lip, right, when you pucker. Okay, now inside the lip, in cross-section, what we have is we have the big form of orbicularis oris, right? And then the other sections of the lip that aren't orbicularis oris are kind of fat, right? So we have a lot of fat in two different dispositions, right? We have fat, kind of subcutaneous fat out here, and then we have what's known as suboral fat, or suborbicularis oris fat, which is actually on the inside of the muscle, closer to the teeth, right? And this fat is the one that helps to evert the vermilion border, evert the lips, so expose more, give you more of a pout to your lips. When you get older, right, as we've seen in other parts of the body, fat kind of starts to degrade and sometimes goes away. And that's when you get a thinning of the lips. So this no longer is in here holding out the orbicularis oris, right? And so then your lips eventually kind of roll in like this. Okay? Now, let's look at this in kind of an actual cross-section. So it's a little bit hard to read, but the interesting thing for me in this, if you kind of follow where I'm going with this line, this is orbicularis oris, right, in cross-section, and it's coming up, and it actually bows way over like this. And that's really interesting because it's not just a flat muscle when you would get out to the lips, right? It doesn't just go vertically as it kind of circumferences the lip, but it bows outward. And what that means is, if you can imagine contracting these fibers in an entire ring around the mouth, just on the kind of pouty part of the lips, right here. So contract that. Essentially, it allows you to roll your lips in, right? And each one of these different sections, contracted in a different amount, will do a different kind of dynamic thing with the lips. But this is really important because this helps us kind of purse our lips, pull the top lip into the lower lip. A lot of interesting things happen. And because it's so close to the skin, when this contracts, we see a really sharp kind of crease at the transition point. Okay, now let's just look at a little bit of difference in these two disposition of the fat of the lip, right? So William Dafoe on the left and some crazy supermodel on the right. William Dafoe, he's looking a little bit out of focus, to be honest, but you get the idea. And so essentially he doesn't have enough fat to evert his lips on the inside, so we're seeing just a lot of orbicularis oris here, and not a lot of fat externally either. We can make out pretty well the vermilion border, and often the border of the lips, at least the lower lip, can appear a little bit fibrous, right? So sometimes you can make out an edge to it, and on the top lip as well, right? Not only is it fibrous, sometimes it's a little bit whiter than the vermilion and the surrounding skin above. Okay, so relatively neutral transition from kind of this labial mental crease to the lower lip. Contrasting is fully everted lips, right? So in cross-section, these would be quite full front to back, so resting on the teeth, and then having enough fat in there to both on top and below orbicularis oris to evert them out. Okay, while we're here, I'm just going to quickly point out on, at least on William, over here, a couple of forms at the kind of transition point of the mouth out here. And we've looked at this a little bit before. Modiolus is the name of it, and it's kind of the collection point for all of the muscles that articulate the edge of the corner of the mouth, right? And I'm going to show it to you in dissection just because this becomes quite a prominent form in a lot of people. Okay, we've seen this guy before up when we were looking at nasalis, but for modiolus, you can kind of get the idea of how crazy this all is around the mouth. So here is zygomatic major, our big smile muscle going off in this direction. Here in different crazy kind of lines is levator labii superioris, so the lifter of the lip on the top. And then here is depressor anguli oris, so the kind of your frowning muscle coming in here. This one attaching to the lip is depressor labii inferioris, so depressor meaning depressed, labii, lip, inferioris means on the lower side as opposed to superioris, which would be the upper lip, right? And all these things kind of are spiraling, and you can't, buccinator is this muscle spiraling in here. He's passing some fibers through, remember? And some fibers from here are coming down to the bottom. Essentially, it's a free-for-all, but the common thing is that this little junction right here supports a lot of these angular pullers. And so it gets really, really fibrous and quite tendinous on the inside. And there's been a lot of kind of articles published on the geometry of the modiolus. But because the majority of these pullers, or the strongest ones, are vertical, so the zygomatic major mostly, this is biased towards the upper lip, right? And so you often get a little crescent shape that just kind of fades off into the upper lip like that, and quite node-shaped or egg-shaped down here. Okay, let's just look at an image of that. So here's Vince Vaughn, kind of young, not chubby Vince Vaughn, another example of Hollywood celebrities gone fat. I don't have a fat photo of him. You don't have to look too far probably to find one, though. But this is what I'm talking about, the modiolus, right? And it just appears at the corner of the mouth, right, as at the oral commissure, right, where this comes together, the upper and lower lips. And essentially that is the transition point for the corner of the mouth, right? Lips are on the inside with thickness, right? The big thing is about the lips is we need thickness. And so then it's terminated at the corner with a form of the modiolus, right? So varying amounts depending on the person. Some are bigger than others. But that's always how you finish off the lips, right on the corner. You don't just leave them as a little sharp cut, okay? Other forms here that we should be aware of, columns of the philtrum going up here. The abicularis oris is creating kind of a form change from here and all the way down to this furrow underneath the lower lip. Okay, so we're looking at kind of a collection like this. The other component that we kind of saw in that last slide that I was talking about, the depressor labii inferioris. Depressor labii means depressor of the lip. So it's not a corner depressor, but it's a lip depressor. And it grabs onto this boundary of the vermilion, and you can often see the attachment point on the just inferior to the vermilion boundary on the lower lip. And it creates these nice little pillars of the mouth going down. And so these are forms that you'll want to pay attention to as well on the lower lip. You contrast that with mentalis and kind of the mental prominence here, so the chin. And then often you'll see just a little bit of a plane change out here from this section to what is the depressor anguli out here. Just reviewing what we were just talking about, node of the mouth, modiolus out here. You can kind of see how where the orbicularis oris kind of loses its volume going up, right? The boundary of it is right here, right lateral to the nostril. And in fact, you start to get fullness here because of the thickness of orbicularis oris, and you're left with a little triangle just lateral to the nostril and medial to the nasolabial furrow. That's kind of a transition spot where there isn't any orbicularis oris, and makes a little bit of a depression, and you can find that on people if you look closely. Okay, just turn our attention again to the lower lip, and you can see kind of the boundary with the vermilion here, and see this little inflection, almost like a little upside down U shape. That's kind of the attachment, just the medial boundary of the attachment of depressor labii inferioris, right? So this lip depressor, that lip depressor is actually coming all the way down to the jawline, right? And it's just dives underneath some of this fat that comes off the chin, right? So you have the chin fat rolling back, a nice little kind of tube, and then this dives under that. Out a little further, depressor anguli grabs on in a similar location actually as this. Okay, so that's usually what you see on the bottom lip, right? Very common. The resultant form is a nice shape like this. The pillars of the mouth. Okay, and then when Marlon Brando was a little bit younger, lips a little bit more everted, right? So a little bit fuller. Kind of see this nice gesture, the two lobes of the lower lip that we saw from kind of embryonic stage, and almost interlocking with this the Cupid's bow of the upper lip, right? There's kind of a nice, interesting mating between them. Make out a little bit of the modiolus there, and a little bit more softened a bit is these pillars of the mouth. Okay, on fully everted lips, right, we have a ton of thickness there, but that's not really what I wanted to put this on for. I wanted to put this on for the kind of this fibrous boundary, right, really quite prominent on these lips. Right, and you can often see, at least on the lower lip, a certain line of the fibrous boundary going back to the corner, right, and then a transition to kind of the fullness of the lip and kind of where the orbicularis oris is coming through. Remember how it gets close to the surface? That's happening right in here, and it kind of makes a nice little boundary there. And then that can roll the lips in, right? If she kind of tried to roll her lips inward, that would be an attachment in there that would pull in. Okay, just a few more, just to try to highlight common forms. Over on this side, we can see kind of big form of modiolus, a little bit of form of depressor. Right. Remember, when I'm talking about these muscles, there is also a layer of subcutaneous fat and skin over top of all of this. So these things aren't just millimeter thin under the surface. They're buried a little bit by some skin, so, and fat potentially. So you won't necessarily see them always very perfectly. Right. It's not always so clear. This is kind of the little triangular transition, right, where I said there's no orbicularis oris. Just keep your eyes out for that, just lateral to the nostril. She's showing some really interesting forms here, kind of the attachment points of depressor labii. She's also showing an interesting configuration of the upper lip vermilion, right? So she's got, of the length of it, the upper lip, right? Only about half is actually vermilion upturned, right? The rest is kind of tucked under. And it comes in all shapes and sizes, and I'm leaving it kind of as an exercise to you guys to observe the different configurations of the lips, because they vary as like the bell curve, you know. You get some really extreme examples. Okay, probably the most remarkable characteristic of this is the modiolus out here, right? Just like you couldn't probably find an example of a more defined one. Okay, and it's really, you have to really appreciate the three-dimensionality of the lips, and how when they come in, they're actually wrapping around on the inside, and then they're rolling out like this. And we'll see a few examples coming up of an open mouth, and that's really where you start to appreciate the construction of the lips. In fact, it's probably a little bit easier to understand on lips that are slightly parted, because you can kind of see the origin of them, which is inside this little corner. Okay, just one more example. Again, this is an example of non-everted lips, so really pretty thin, not very much vermilion showing, and there's a correlation to kind of the thinness of the vermilion and the angle coming off the nose, right? As you imagine, the more vermilion is showing, the more fat there is kind of everting it, which means you get a thicker lip in profile. Right, this is not a pure profile, but if this guy had fuller lips, these would be everted, and this angle would get steeper, right? Okay, so that's kind of the last quick look at the lips. Now, I want to say a few words about teeth in the next section, okay? Because teeth are really important for essentially holding out these forms that we're looking at.